Hi everyone, friends. You're on the Motion Ram channel. Here, it's all about animation, stock footage, and everything related to motion design. You asked a lot for a breakdown of a more complex animation, so today we're going to analyze this wonderful dynamic animation from the Ukrainian studio Zelios. And as always, I'll teach you everything, show you everything, so let's not wait any longer and jump right into After Effects.
And as always, we create a new solid layer. Let's name it the BG background for our project, which will serve as the base. The color is roughly like this, almost white. We write our first text. For me, it will be motion. For the font, I almost always use Inter. I really like it. Set it to regular, align to center, center point in the middle, align to center. Duplicate with Ctrl-D and write ROM motion ROM. Of course, you can certainly write anything you like. Here, I'll write down my personal nickname. Perhaps the medium size will indeed work. Let's now take a moment to see how it truly looks. We precisely center both of the texts so that they are more or less in the exact middle overall. That's the overall picture. No, actually, I'll go with regular. I also add a 0 in order to perfectly align both texts in the center. And next, let's carefully add a 0 and then progressively increase the scale parameter quite a bit. This particular adjustment will be specifically for animating both the position and the scale properties, and we will meticulously set the very first keyframe for the scale at this point. And we'll also set the second keyframe for the scale property. The first value is 200, and the second value is 150. We'll also set the first keyframe for position and the second keyframe for position, and we'll animate it from right to left. Let's now shift the current position slightly to the right for the time being. Actually, no, we do need to create a separate null and then make the main null. So let's create one more additional null for the word motion. This will be the animation for the position and scale properties for the first text element, and for the next two null objects we'll need a main null object, which we will further animate by its position property. Let's name it P1 main. Again, let's center everything. And let's animate the scale property for the very first null object, specifically for the first text layer. The initial value is 200, and it will then smoothly go down to 100. And also the position. Just like we originally wanted to do with the main null from the very beginning of this project. Let's move our text to the right. The animation graph value is 85 using the motion tool. This is the animation we get. But now let's really play around a little bit more with the precise placement of our keyframes to truly find that very dynamic, incredibly cool moment. Let's delete the position for now. I think maybe we'll actually do it only on the main null. Let's add a Gaussian blur. Oops, I added it to the wrong place. Let's add it to the text. Set the first keyframe. This gives us an animation that looks like the text is unblurring. Now about the scale. Okay, let's turn on our second text. And let's actually animate our main null right now indeed. By its position, of course. There, something like that. Let's reposition our second text again because it was parented to the null and got shifted. And now we get this kind of animation. To make it a bit more dynamic, you can move the animation keys on the main null even further to the left. And so this is what we end up with. The animation graph is set to 85, and there will be this kind of movement to the left by position. And thanks to the fact that we have a second null on the second text, we'll get this additional animation. This kind of really adds a professional and polished touch. And we'll trim it at the highest speed, that is somewhere in the middle of these animation keys, because our animation graph is set to 85. And this is the kind of animation we'll have so that the second text appears dynamically. Let's duplicate the null object once more. We will have the P2 main system, and we will then link the P1 main system directly to the P2 main system. This is so that we can add another animation to the main animation, just like we did for the text element. But now we're making the same kind of animation for the overall, or rather for both texts. That is to say, we have a small noticeable position jump happening once, and then it occurs again. Let's take some time to play around a little bit with the precise placement of the keyframes in our animation to carefully find that absolutely perfect moment when the text elegantly appears in the most visually appealing and effective way. And we set the animation graph to somewhere around 80, 85 as well. Let's look at the animation graph. They intersect quite well, basically. Not bad at all, actually. Still, let's set the value to 85 so that all the animation graphs match. That will be the best way. And now we position the null object somewhere around here on the timeline. Yes, it might be a bit too far in terms of position, I think, or maybe not. Let's duplicate the text. This will be our third text. And we simply type. Let's center it. Anchor it in the very center, or rather, let's move it over to the right. Let's proceed to duplicate our existing null object, which will then serve as a parent to additionally animate our third text layer, allowing for more complex and precise motion control within our composition. Now let's see how the animation of our null is performed. We set slightly lighter and also slightly darker shades of the color blue specifically for this purpose. You can choose whatever you like. I'm repeating sort of the animations, showing how to make a specific animation. So I'll be choosing something that is more or less quite similar just by looking at it with my eye. Next, we will carefully click on the ramp start, specifically on the small distinctive bell icon, and then we will precisely write in the designated field the phrase expression to comp value. Copy the expression and paste it into the end ramp. This is absolutely necessary so that when animating the text, our gradient colors do not noticeably shift. That is to say, they moved as if they were firmly and securely attached to the text and moved along precisely with it. If you want the gradient to just exist on its own, you do not have to do this particular step, but then the color will certainly change on the text. Next, we trim, or rather, more precisely, duplicate our text. The second motion to remove the gradient from it. And as if it completely turned black. And we insert the gradient into our third text. And there will be this kind of visual transition effect when it gracefully enters, almost like an optical illusion, I guess. As if the gradient jumps from our first text to the third one. It's a pretty cool effect. We simply add a new shape and then we proceed to add a fill. And we carefully place it somewhere precisely between the existing texts. Then we meticulously increase its overall size so that it becomes roughly a perfect square shape, just like this. And we also need to make it a little bit taller. So it's not a perfectly standard square, but rather just slightly and subtly stretched upwards, giving it a more elongated and distinct appearance. We round the corners. And we then change the color to a blue hue. Just rename it to 01. Duplicate this element and then carefully reduce its overall size, but make sure to lock the proportions so that our new rectangle meticulously keeps the exact same width and height parameters as our primary main rectangle. And then we will systematically decrease its dimensions. Finally, reduce the corner radius of this newly scaled down shape. That is the roundness. Something like this. Actually, no, let's make it a square. Let it be 550 by 550. Next, you will press Ctrl G to group everything together. Now let's group it all up. Then you can add another distinct rectangle, and then you will add a stroke to carefully create a rectangle inside the stroke. And then I have it positioned like this right here. Let's proceed to change its color, but you currently can't clearly see it because the rectangular shape is incorrectly positioned within the stroke. And it appears that the rectangle and the stroke have been inadvertently swapped. Therefore, we absolutely need to switch their positions. Like this. The groups are actually arranged incorrectly. The main rectangle was positioned on top, so let's significantly increase its overall size. Something like this, perhaps around 450 to 500, so that it truly looks like a kind of distinct and prominent frame. Stroke at 1.5 for now. And let's also add some rounding. We'll increase the stroke a little bit and slightly change the stroke color as well, in addition. And this will be kind of like, I don't know, a postcard or something like that. This second rectangle with the stroke. Let's add something to it. I'll add my personal logo. You can add something else. Perhaps an icon, a photograph, or truly anything you like and prefer. Like this one, for example. Let's tweak the color a bit more. I don't really like it when it's too light. And I'll add a fill to the logo because mine is a PNG, and with this image you can't change the color any other way. We need to add some kind of effect to it. I'll just move it up a little bit more further. You'll see why in a moment, so that it's visible. And I'll link the logo to this postcard. And I need to rotate it just a little bit. This is precisely how the anchor point rotates when it's perfectly centered in the very middle of the object. Let's try it like this. No, actually, let's carefully rotate it and then precisely set the anchor point to the bottom left corner, so that we can just smoothly rotate it from that specific anchor point. And let's proceed to carefully rotate each of these individual postcards by precisely the same number of degrees, ensuring that each one becomes at least a little bit visible and discernible. Let's set the very first one to -6, 6, and 0, then subsequently meticulously and precisely arrange everything in the correct and appropriate order. Like this. So our anchor point is in the bottom left corner. Let's add 0 and then rotate them once again so they align a little bit better, because right now they currently look truly too tilted. Something just exactly like that. Null objects are often incredibly useful to employ for these specific kinds of manipulations, especially when you have a significant number of objects and need to either precisely move or slightly rotate them. It's truly and remarkably beneficial to utilize a null object for situations like this. Next, carefully take the pen tool and meticulously draw roughly the very same shape as I have here, ensuring accuracy and detail. I'm drawing everything while holding Shift to keep the lines straight. Well, not everything, because I drew almost everything with Shift. And this will be the primary shape that will blur. It will effectively blur directly on top of the existing layer. Let's add a Gaussian blur. Set the value to 120. And enable this little thing here. Ours transforms. I forgot what it's actually called. Our shape then turns into this kind of blurry visual effect. It kind of becomes an adjustment layer. That's how we set up all the links. Oh, and we also carefully created a precise mask so that our intentionally blurred shape is exclusively contained within the defined area of our primary main rectangle, ensuring a clean and professional visual outcome. Something like that. The blur value is arbitrary, around 100, 125. I think that will be perfectly fine. Now we will add the text so it looks like some kind of folder or something very similar to that. Let's write folder. You can write any text you want there, but I'll write folder. I will duplicate it and then write motion run projects into the field. I make the second text smaller. That's it. Align the anchor point. And you can also set the paragraph to left align so everything lines up nicely now. And I will reduce the second text to, let's say, 50 and then set its weight to light, or perhaps even 40. And I adjust the placement a bit so everything looks harmonious. Something like this, I truly think that will be perfectly fine. Yes. Next, let's also link this particular text element to our main rectangle. Let's then proceed to create a brand new shape within our design. This will be a polystar, basically a star shape. Add a fill. And we will now draw something like a gear. We will set the points to 8, the inner radius to 75, and the outer radius to 100. Then set the inner radius roundness to 60 and the outer radius roundness to 100, so that we get something like a gear. Next, draw an additional perfectly circular ellipse and precisely position it, carefully centering everything within the composition. Set its anchor point to the exact center and meticulously position it. Then, copy the precise position coordinates and carefully paste them into this existing circle layer, so that the circle is now perfectly centered within our gear design. After that, apply the alpha invert matte effect to effectively create a distinct sort of hole or aperture within the gear itself. Finally, parent the circle layer to the gear layer so that these two essential objects will move and transform together in perfect synchronization. Yes. Here's the gear we've got. Let's set up some helpful guides to roughly have a sort of square area where we'll precisely place the gear. And let's proceed to reduce its scale. I think a value of around 30 should be perfectly fine for our current needs. Subsequently, let's carefully position it precisely where the guides are located, ensuring that everything is meticulously aligned evenly and perfectly with our main text, creating a visually harmonious composition. Let's copy the animation curve from this 0 point to make sure it's exactly the same. I don't even remember what it was anymore. And we carefully trim it halfway through so that all of our visual elements appear dynamically and smoothly. Yeah, you can even make it 90. It'll actually just be a little bit less than what we drew. Alright, now let's proceed to add an interesting extra effect using the rotation property. We set 2 keyframes for rotation. Turn the very first one a little bit to the left, set its value to a precise -6 or a positive +6, and the second one should be just exactly like we had it previously, slightly rotated. And then let's also add the elastic expression from the motion tools. But it's critically important that the second keyframe remains perfectly linear, then the entire animation will work absolutely great. And our values are 20, 40, and 40. This gives us a very slight and subtle rocking effect on the overall rotation. Let's even set the value to -8 for a more intense and powerful rocking experience. And here the value is +3. And let's also animate our postcards additionally, giving them some dynamic movement. We will also carefully set keyframes for them at precisely the same positions, or rather, accurately set the individual keys for each animation property. And we carefully set these specific values, also with a precise step of exactly 6 degrees. Let's carefully copy the animation graph, then paste it right here, and then add the elastic easing function. Let's also copy this elastic with the values 40, 40, 20, 40, 40, and paste it into the next 2 postcards. Something like this. And let's shift it to the right by about 2 or 3 frames. So each subsequent postcard, this particular shape will be shifted to the right by like approximately 2 frames. This ensures that we have a smooth and sequential animation that flows naturally. I wanted to say some smart word, but I forgot what this type of animation is called. So let's now move on to discussing the polystar, which is a key part of our gear. Let's also animate an extra animation for the rotation. So let's say this will be about 4. That is to say it's 4 times 360 and down to 0, so that our gear spins really fast and then quickly stops completely. And I also added a cursor. I had it meticulously prepared in advance, but you can easily find any suitable cursor you like on the Icon Finder website. I usually obtain some useful icons from there if I happen to need something specific or just browsing for inspiration. Some I draw myself. For example, like this gear. And let's animate the mouse as if it's gracefully moving over and carefully picking up this particular folder of ours with all those, whatever they are, delightful postcards or whatever these creative projects are. I really don't know. And kind of throws it, so to speak. So let's animate the position of our mouse, carefully setting its movement over time. But let's also tweak the rotation a bit, adjusting its orientation. Our mouse should move precisely in the direction, basically, along the specific path we're following, so it should always be straight and aligned with its trajectory. We've adjusted it up to this point. Let's adjust it a bit. And this is the kind of animation we get. Let's proceed to duplicate, or more precisely, split our substantial big rectangle by utilizing the keyboard shortcut combination of Ctrl-Shift-D. Following this crucial step, I want to meticulously make our mouse cursor move across the screen. And then, it could also potentially go off on its own afterwards, for sure. Let's proceed to completely split all of the individual elements within this composition so that we are then able to fully and meticulously manipulate each and every one of these distinct objects entirely from scratch, subsequently re-establishing and relinking everything back to our designated second large rectangular shape. And this should be directly linked to the current cursor position. So that, at first, our mouse precisely moves across the display, and then our interactive elements are dynamically attached to the mouse's current position, allowing us to effectively control both the primary mouse cursor and these distinct rectangles and all the various shapes within the interactive environment. Yes. Let's turn on 3D, because I wanted to try it with scale, but with scale it's not possible to get that kind of rotation. Well, it works, but it's not quite what we need. And so right now this is what we have. Some kind of animation with 3D like this. However, here we do have some significant issues with this particular shape. In a three-dimensional environment, alpha matte and alpha invert matte functionalities might not work as expected. So, for the time being, let me temporarily set the rotation to precisely 0 degrees, then carefully set up the necessary guides, and meticulously manually draw this entire mask along the precise contours of our shape, specifically this blurred one. Basically, it's not that hard to do with the pen tool. Right here, set the mask, align it with the guide. And we will go along our entire shape where I have carefully and precisely set up the guides. Here we will have a gentle, flowing and smooth curve. Here, hold it. Not just place a point, but hold and drag so that a handle appears. Here, just place it. Here again you can place and then drag, and somewhere around this particular point so that we can get a really nice, smoothly rounded shape. Alright, then continue along the precise shape. Place it exactly like this. There will be helpful guides, like everything should snap together nicely. If not, you can easily adjust this in the Window tab. Enable the Snap to Grids feature. This function is called in this particular manner. Let's carefully copy our mask and then precisely paste it into the second distinct part we've meticulously split. This way, the mask should fit perfectly and seamlessly if everything is indeed done correctly. And we will now proceed to delete these blur masks and shapes. They are no longer truly needed, since this particular method won't work in 3D at all anyway. we set keyframes for scale and for the cursor to create this type of click effect, as if we're grabbing these objects with the mouse. Alright, let's carefully rotate it a bit, add some slight rotation, and see precisely how it visually looks. Let's turn off RBG so it doesn't get in the way in 3D. You can make it look like a background this way. We can easily turn off our solid object if we no longer require its visibility or interaction. Then carefully take the rotation control specifically on the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, and precisely rotate it by exactly 25 degrees to achieve the desired orientation. Set the animation graph, let's make it 75 for now. Let's carefully stretch our scale keyframes a little bit so there's a distinct click, then a smooth rotation, and then make it so that when you completely drop it, it gracefully disappears. I want to create this particular kind of animation right now, demonstrating these specific effects. We need to look for that now. Let's first meticulously create the captivating and visually appealing animation for the specific text element. We meticulously set keyframes at the precise 0 point on the various objects to which our animated text elements are intrinsically linked and connected. Specifically the main one, so that we have two texts or something on the left moving, and one text, the one on the right. So we'll have two distinct grouped objects that will smoothly move, and we'll precisely animate their position as they converge towards the central point, and also animate their visual scale to gradually decrease. For the scale, I think 75 should be fine. That should probably be enough to meet the requirements. And for graphics animations, we mostly use 85, so let's set it to 85 there as well. Specifically, we will apply this technique to the existing text and then proceed to animate it to reach a final value of approximately 30. A range of 30 to 40 should also work perfectly fine in principle and be quite acceptable. Additionally, for the intricate graphics animation, precisely set its value to 85. Following this, carefully stretch the keyframes a considerable amount and then gently move them slightly more toward the absolute center. So that the next one disappears very quickly, almost so you can barely perceive how our text completely vanishes from view, leaving virtually no trace behind. Now, we also need to play around a little bit with the precise positioning of the elements. We need to make the mouse move across the screen. Next, it carefully grabs this specific element and then very slowly starts moving steadily upward and should completely disappear. I think we need to separate these objects again so that we have the ability to animate them independently and we can move these elements separately from the mouse. Let's try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And we proceed to animate the mouse in an upward trajectory, specifically to its pop position. More precisely, it is the null object itself that is responsible for this precise positioning and movement. When observing the animation graphics at frame 85, we encounter a noticeable and rather problematic glitch here, as I have realized. The mouse cursor begins to move unexpectedly into the text area, and then abruptly changes its intended position. This behavior is certainly not ideal and indicates a significant issue within the animation sequence. We need to figure out what can be done at this point. And if we precisely link this visual element to the movement of the cursor, we will inevitably end up with some kind of noticeable and significant visual distortion. Okay, let's carefully proceed to delete this specific part, and then begin our work from a certain, well-defined value. Now, we need to thoroughly rethink how to properly animate it so that absolutely nothing inadvertently falls apart or becomes dislodged anywhere during the process. Let us proceed by performing the action of pressing the key combination Ctrl-Shift-D on the current cursor, which will then create an additional cursor that is designed to move in an upward direction. That's how it truly works for us. Everything is animating, so let's now unlink it. Alright, perhaps it would be beneficial to try and do something more substantial with the third part of this project after all. If, however, that particular approach does not work out as intended, then we will certainly need to figure out an entirely different and viable alternative way to proceed. But no, apparently that's not going to work after all. Let's also proceed to delete this additional second cursor and in fact completely zero it out to ensure accuracy. But you start looking for some complicated solutions to it. And then you need to animate further using the scale, a large rectangle. This is roughly how we position the animation graphics. Our more precisely keyframes so that they line up somewhere, roughly with the start of the cursor animation by position. We slightly adjust the rectangle a bit. Oh, what rectangle? Rotation to be precise. Because we're making the animation graphic 95, I want everything to be a bit more dynamic. So let's create a new shape. Fill. Let's move on to the next part. And let's set the specific window size to approximately 840 by 260 pixels with snapping enabled. And then we'll proceed to reduce it to about 3400 units. Let's add a ramp gradient. Enable 3D so that we can really just get this visual effect, because all our elements are 3D. And if the various elements aren't truly 3D, then it might not properly work. Who knows what could happen otherwise. And let's set approximately these colors. Let's just add a little rounding. Set it to just 0.1. Duplicate it. Yes. And on the second one, remove the gradient. Let's set the color. Something like white, or you can use sixes like our background. Add fast blur to the top one. Set it to about 5. On the second one, add not fast blur but Gaussian blur. Set it to about 200. And set the opacity to around 40, maybe a bit higher. Use the arrow keys to move our shapes. And on the timeline, move them over here. Roughly like this. Now, I want to precisely position it so that this particular area is approximately where all our various shapes will dynamically and smoothly disappear. Align this top shape directly to the bottom shape, and also we will effectively link their respective sizes using the Alt key, so that when you change one rectangle, the other changes as well. Because they're the same size, which is exactly what we need. And that way, you don't have to click around or look for both rectangles. Now, carefully set the rotation to a precise minus 40 degrees, but it is absolutely crucial to make sure that the active camera is indeed enabled and not some other alternative view. Everything should ideally work perfectly from the active camera, as that is considered the primary and most important front view for your current task. Now let's also just do the main bottom rectangle as well, and also now add a stroke to them. For now, let's switch to custom view so we can move other sliders around, because sometimes you can't see everything in active camera. Let's remove the fill for now, turn it off, and add a gradient. Also a ramp with a thicker stroke. And let's set colors like these as well. I'm just picking them more or less at random so they're not in a similar color scheme, even with an even thicker stroke. And let's add a Gaussian blur effect to this layer as well. Set the value to about 5. That'll do. Now we already have a fill here, which is quite useful. Let's this will be the primary setting, and there will be a fill as well. We'll remove the gradient there. Here, let's make it white. So that we still have some color underneath, just so we have something. And with a mask, let's roughly draw this kind of distinct shape. And let's apply a mask feather to blur the mask. And let's invert it so it shows the other side. There's this kind of really interesting, unique, particular shape. And animate it by position. Custom ones as well, to make it very easy to animate. And then animate it specifically by its precise position. Because if you do it manually by adjusting parameters, it will definitely shift somewhere along some particular axis. It might move along the x-axis or the z-axis, but if you use these convenient sliders, it moves exactly along the intended axis, along the precise one path you truly need to follow. Let's carefully move this element down so that all the visual elements are positioned correctly and precisely, so they just don't overlap. Let's arrange everything somewhere around here. These second rectangles? Yes. For scale, we need to adjust this by its specific size. But I'm thinking, should it be by its overall scale or by its precise size? Because the fundamental interaction between scale and size is quite different, and it will ultimately show up in a distinct manner. So this is the kind of animation we get. Yes, let's probably go with size after all. I think it'll look more interesting. With scale, the rounding just works a little bit differently for us, and it might, in some cases, get a little bit distorted there perhaps. With size, everything will be fine. Let's trim some of the different moments a bit. Let's see what we have here, so that everything flies out nicely. Yes, these are our highest moments. Let's cut off all these elements so that they disappear at the moment when our last rectangles just finally appear. More precisely, these distinct shapes that appear are based on their size, so that there's also this precise cutting of elements and the subsequent appearance of the next ones to make it truly dynamic. And let's move them around a bit as well. And also trim them so that one doesn't overlap the other. Something like that. Let's duplicate it once more as well. Let's move it a bit to the right. And let's quickly fix our current size, because it is currently linked to the completely wrong rectangle. Here, let's relink it, and let's animate it as well. More precisely, let's change the overall size for this particular one of ours, for our next shapes. Let's make it a bit smaller. Gaussian blur, set the size to 120/200. and opacity, so that everything looks a bit lighter for us. Smoother, not so harsh. And let's duplicate it one more time and do exactly the same procedure. Let's fix everything a bit. Let's go ahead and link it up so that we will have these three distinct shapes that are going to appear on the screen for us. Let's set the step to 2, that is 2 more, so that our blinds move to the right. And let's press sequence. Let's move them a bit. These are automations in Motion tool. Alright, and let's add a significant bit more of that Gaussian blur to our white shapes so that it blurs just a little bit. And to truly get that smooth, subtly blurred effect, it should look quite incredibly cool, honey. This will really enhance the visual appeal. Nako. So at this point, this is the animation we get. Let's just move the cursors to the top now. But it's still not quite on the very top position. This usually happens because of an incorrect or improper positioning of the object or subject. You can easily and effectively do it with just the very last axis, which is the final dimension. What if we set the value to something like how much? 100 here, 100, and now everything is fine. So it turns out that because of the way things are positioned along the axis, some elements overlap others in terms of their position in space. When we set the value to 100, they separated a bit and our cursor ended up on top. So this is the animation that we actually get. Let's even make it a little bit more. Let's add a Gaussian blur to these white shapes, for example, specifically. And let's even further increase the value just a little bit now to 150. Let's make the cursor a bit smaller to 95. So the click isn't so strong. Not as strong, to be precise. Alright, and now let's proceed to add to our rather large rectangle. Let's also link it directly to the cursor as well. And now let's proceed to create an additional and distinct rotation animation. Specifically, when our interactive shape is precisely grabbed or engaged with the mouse cursor, we will then implement and apply an extra, noticeable rotational effect to it. These are in fact those secondary animations that serve as important and valuable additions to the main one, enhancing the overall visual experience. And they will make the animation look a bit more professional, because if there's only one animation, it will be a bit boring. This way it looks more like realistic movements. When you pick up an element, it doesn't just get picked up instantly, but has some additional motions. For example, when you pick something up with your hand. With your hand, to be precise, you first have to lift it and make some extra movement. Okay, we've got some kind of bug here. This is probably also because of the shortcut, either because of the scale or because of the position. We need to carefully figure it out fully over time. Yeah, try increasing the scale just a little bit more so that it's there in that location as well. And our elements were on top of the shape, basically, or they kind of overlapped it because they had the same scale. Maybe there was a difference in position there. In any case, you can also fix it by adjusting the scale. Clear? And it turns out that the only exact match actually happens during the very brief transition moment. It's probably this particular keyframe. Something is definitely messing things up a bit for us. We'll fix all of this right now as well, without any further delay. We will resolve this issue completely. So that we can precisely insert that crucial keyframe or carefully adjust the rotation at a specific designated location within the animation timeline. Oh, I just remembered we had rotation 3 right here, so everything perfectly matches up. That's the extra keyframe we specifically created for this purpose. Though I don't quite remember precisely why we actually added it, to be honest. And when we were carefully drawing this particular mask for the object blur, that's exactly when it was originally created. So this is the animation we end up with. Aha, I see another bug. I must have inadvertently clicked on something somewhere by accident, so I really need to fix that now. Yeah, then this situation really gets messed up for us. The entire scale gets significantly messed up. No, let's delete the null object. We don't need it. Let's just unparent it. Okay, that works. Everything's just been unparented from S1. I must have accidentally parented it somewhere. So what's coming up next? Let's finally take a comprehensive look at what we've got right now. So friends, this is the animation we ended up with. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks for watching. And as always, see you in the next tutorials.